You are watching the Skeptics Guide to the Universe, your escape to reality.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptics Guide to the Universe. Today is Saturday, September 4th, 2021, and this is your host, Stephen Novella. Joining me this week are Bob Novella.
Hey, everybody.
Kara Santa Maria.
Howdy.
Jay Novella.
Hey, guys.
And Evan Bernstein.
Hello, everyone.
And we have a special in-studio guest with us, George Robb.
Hi.
George.
Hello. It's been so long. You've all changed so much since last I saw you. Oh my gosh, how you've grown. I'm so proud. I'm so proud.
Kara, I just want you to know we're okay with the whole flood and the rain. We're good.
We survived
I'm glad. It was
sequential hurricanes.
looking pretty scary.
But Kara, guess what happened?
What?
Whenever there's a storm, guess what happens in my yard?
A tree falls down.
A tree fell down, exactly. See, everybody knows.
Does it make
yes,
a noise?
another tree
Does it
fell
make a
down.
No.
I know. Every time it happens, it costs me $1,000. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous.
Well, I'll let all of you know that I'm also safe from wildfires, even though Lake Tahoe is burning. And the skies are not great. I'm not under any sort of immediate threat here in LA right now.
Excellent.
Yeah, I saw a video of somebody walking out from being indoors, and it was, I guess, dusk, and the sky was literally blood red.
Oh, yeah. Ooh.
Yeah, you see that periodically at the worst of it. It's so scary. But you guys saw these videos of New York City, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
My God.
Subway.
Subway.
People drowning in their
Brooklyn
basement.
Philly as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Philly was bad.
Nuts.
Yeah.
They're calling it a
Horrible.
500-year rain event.
Yeah, but that's BS because this is the new norm, man.
Yeah. Well, still, though, even with the new norm, I don't think we'll be seeing this, at least for another 10 years.
It probably won't be 500 years.
No,
before
I
we
guarantee
figure
you
it
that.
out.
It's no longer biblical.
So we are recording on a Saturday for a couple of reasons. One is we just like to do it, right? like the podcast. We haven't done a live, video SGU episode in a while. But the primary reason is that we were supposed to all be at DragonCon this weekend, and we decided that we didn't want to be moving through massive crowds in the middle of the worst spike of the Delta variant of COVID that we've had so far.
Yeah.
Call us crazy.
During a place in the country where it's particularly bad.
So it was just the unfortunately the pandemic was just too bad. We could not, in good conscience, go to Atlanta. Do it. I wish everyone there well. but we just couldn't do it. We have too many people in our immediate family who are vulnerable. I work at a hospital. It just doesn't work. So we couldn't go. But we will be streaming a portion of this show to DragonCon. We were supposed to do a stage show at tonight, Saturday night, from 7 to 8 p.m. So when 7 o'clock comes around, we're going to start streaming to DragonCon. If everything else works out well, we'll reintroduce ourselves at that point. But we're going to do the first half of the show first.
That's good. Doing the first half of the show first.
I thought of doing the second half first, and then I thought it'd be more natural if we did the first half.
It just makes more sense to do the first half first. That's
Not a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Guys, I got to say, I saw the coolest, one of the all-time, I think, most original DragonCon costumes someone posted. And it occurred to me that this costume would have made no sense a year ago.
Yeah.
It was the Delta variant. So it was a Loki, a female Loki dressed as a Delta stewardess.
Delta.
So it was the Delta variant.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Is that not brilliant?
Clever.
It was so clever.
That is so meta.
And if we had seen that literally, 12, 15 months ago, you'd have been like, what? Because Loki wasn't out yet.
Yeah.
COVID wasn't happening.
Well, Delta
and there was no Delta variant.
Cutting
so now
edge.
it's just insanely funny.
My preparation for DragonCon was basically this.
Very nice.
That is pretty cool.
Spock mask.
Logical.
Steve, how many layers does it have?
It's very thick. It was good. Here's
It has 2 layers.
Star Trek, the original series face mask. There's my COVID DragonCon costume. We'll get to where Bob, you had one too.
Yes.
What does Bob have?
Come on.
What is it?
Oh, wow, the floor.
Bob. The
The
famous
Hilton floor.
the
The,
carpet.
DragonCon carpet.
The DragonCon
the
carpet.
copyrighted DragonCon carpet.
Yep.
I will never.
Which is such
It's
a
everywhere.
bizarre
It's everywhere.
I'll never forget the DragonCon where we're doing a live show. We always, wear costumes when we're doing the live show at DragonCon. But Bob actually thought he was going to do the entire show wearing a full face mask.
Yeah,
Pirate mask.
And Steve signed off on it. And it was an awesome. It was an awesome costume. Well worth the muffled hour and a half of talking.
That's an excellent demonstration of memory distortion over time.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
So how is everybody processing the fact that we're 3 months away from 2022?
Yeah.
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 4 months. Yeah.
And it feels like we're still just reckoning with 2019.
Yeah.
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 Like
I know.
so much time has been both dragging on and also completely lost. It really doesn't feel possible
Yeah.
that 2019 will have been, quote, 3 years. I mean, I know it's not actually exactly, but like 3 years ago, the beginning of 2019.
Right.
It is weird. It's disorienting because we've fallen out of our normal life patterns enough where our sense of time is complete nonsense in our heads as it is. But you do anything to disrupt the apple cart and you get disoriented. It really is disorienting.
Yeah, but to clarify, the pandemic really started at the beginning of 2020. It's been a year and a half. But at the end of this year will be 2 full years, really, of the pandemic. And we're definitely going to still be in the middle of this.
Yeah.
Again, I remember when this started, we had no idea how long it was going to be. We were talking weeks.
Yeah.
Then weeks became months. Then we're like, maybe we'll have a vaccine by the end of the year. The idea now that we're still on the upswing of one of the worst, waves of this pandemic, more than a year and a half into it. Yep. And honestly,
Didn't have to be that way though.
We still cannot tell how long this is going to drag on because another variant could emerge. Then that kind of could reset the clock on having to get vaccinated. Have to do that. Everyone have to get a booster, et cetera.
But Steve, at least everyone's everyone's agreed to kind of move forward together and do all the steps necessary to try to tamp it and. At least as a country, we're all together in this,
we're all the same.
unified, doing this. At least there's that. We can. Oh wait, no,
Which
the
country?
total polar.
Yeah, what a sense of community,
What's freaking me out is the fact that we are as far from 1982 as 1982 was from the start of World War II.
Yeah.
It's 40 years
Yeah.
like that, because in high school, or grade school, whatever high school, to be thinking of like the 40s as it was such a foreign like such
Ancient history.
old, ancient history, and now that is what
Because
my
that-
high school years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is.
Because that's my mom, right? My mom was born in the 40s. But
Oh,
I
right.
am the age of many moms. And that's something that's hard to grapple with, I think. I was
Yeah.
born in 1983, so one
There you
year
go.
apart from what you were just referencing.
There you go, exactly, yeah.
So
Oh, boy.
a little bit of good news since we're talking about the pandemic and everything. A study came out just a couple days ago where they looked at 6.8 million people receiving one of the two mRNA vaccines. And they found essentially no serious side effects. No serious side effects. 6.8 million doses of either of the mRNA vaccines. Now, there were not serious side effects. The big one probably is the pericarditis. So it can cause a little
Heart
bit of
inflammation.
inflammation around the heart. But these were mild cases. Most of the people who had the symptoms were observed in the hospital for one day and then sent home. No long-term or serious consequences. So it wasn't considered a serious adverse event. But it was an adverse event. But again, still, it's they said there were 32 total cases again out of 6.8 million doses.
Wow.
This is
So
like
when you say no serious side effects, what are the serious side effects?
Death.
well, I mean, they
None. So there's
yeah.
no serious.
None, yeah.
What about the serious side effects?
So the risk was
No, there's none.
If we could do the math, the denominator was 6.8 million, but it's zero. Yeah, there was zero
Yes.
serious side effects.
Yes, but I think we would see serious side effects if we gave it to 1 trillion people. I think we would get one serious side effect.
That's true.
That's just my theory.
Yeah, so
Okay.
the thing is, we're at winning the lottery level
Yeah.
of statistics at this point, like where you could start to make statements like, yeah, you're more likely to die on the way to work in the car, or get hit by lightning, or die from coconut falling out of a tree. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Way more,
Yeah. It's so unlikely that statistically it's just not worth worrying about.
If you're afraid of the vaccine, then you shouldn't be taking baths
Right.
or playing with your dog.
That makes too much sense, Bob. We don't live in a world where people are trusting authority and expertise and science. Like
We're going to get to this, actually, Jay. That's one of the news items that we're going to be talking about.
that's correct. I'm prepping
You're
the audience.
pre-gaming it a little bit. No,
Teaser.
but the thing is, I mean, the facts are inarguable. And again, I remember like this time a year ago, they were developing the vaccine. It's a new technology, the mRNA technology. And I remember, we were talking about this fact, and I was thinking, it's like, God, I really hope this vaccine works out. I really hope it works out. It was perfectly possible that the efficacy of the vaccine was 40% or 50%, or that would not have surprised me. It would have been like, okay, it's better than nothing. A little disappointing, but that was one of the possible outcomes. No, it's 95%, like home run efficacy for this vaccine. And it's also possible that there could have been a lot of serious side effects. It could have, again, when you give it, you test it in 40,000 people, that's reassuring, but then you give it to 40 million people, 100 million people, and more side effects emerge. And we're far enough into this now, and again, this is part of the reason for this new data, is just looking, say, okay, now that we have 9 months under our belt with the mRNA vaccines, let's take a look at the data and really see what's going on here. It's really a home run. It's a home run. Science came through for us for this pandemic better than we could have hoped for, really. If you still reject the vaccine at this point, it's because you don't believe the data, right? You do not trust authority. You don't trust these numbers. There's no rational reason not to get vaccinated. If you look at the risk of dying of COVID versus the risk of the vaccine, it's a no-brainer, right? It has to stem from either misinformation or just a blatant lack of trust in the system. Again, we're going to be getting to that in more general.
Steve, do you think it's going to end up being a three shot, like with the booster thing?
I think so.
That's pretty. Isn't that more standard than
Depends on the vaccine.
Depends on it. Okay.
Some are one shot,
Yeah, like,
some are two, some are three.
Yeah, Gardasil's a three
Yeah.
shot now. It used to be two because now it covers more of the different types. Flu is annual.
Yeah.
It may be that it becomes an annual thing.
Maybe.
And the
Probably
hope
will
would
be.
be because it's such, yeah, and because we, as if I had anything to do with it,
royal
because
we.
the incredible, researchers and scientists have managed to figure out how to accelerate. mRNA vaccines happen really fast. The hope is that anytime there's a new variant, Delta being the dominant one now, but now there's this, what is it, Mu? This Mu
That's the
variant?
new one that's on the rise.
Yeah.
Yeah, the CDC just started to warn people
Right.
about that.
So the hope is that each year, if this does become an annual jab, that each year we're able to sort of track and get out in front of it, just like
Yeah.
we try to do with the flu.
So just when someone argues that, the third booster now means that it's not effective, the argument you can present is that no, many of these vaccines require multiple, and it doesn't
Right.
reflect at all its efficacy.
This is how the
And to
immune
be
system
clear-
works.
Yeah, and to be clear, there's two, like we're trying really hard to make sure that the language is clean. So there's a third dose and there's a booster.
Right.
The third dose is what's available right now to immunocompromised people. So the idea is that because they are so immunocompromised, they needed a 3-shot course in order to get to the same immunity that you and I only needed a 2-shot course to get to, because their own body isn't working as well. Their own immune system is struggling. Later, perhaps by the end of September, there have been some signals, but maybe not. And we still don't know if the booster will be reformulated or if it'll just be the same old shot. That's the booster shot. The booster is the idea that you get a new jab when you have waning immunity.
Yeah.
So the third dose is for immunocompromised people. The booster shot is for waning immunity.
Cool.
Right, which is typical.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, totally.
many vaccines, they don't last for life. You may need a booster in 10 years or every year or whatever. It just depends on the nature of the vaccine, the nature of the organism that you're vaccinating against. The immune system's complicated. There are different pieces of it, and we just have to test it, follow it, and it's all evidence-based.
And also, Steve, the nature of our fellow country people, like if everybody would have gotten vaccinated, we wouldn't see these intense variants taking hold and really cycling through the community as much. So part of the reason that we very likely are going to have to continue to get these shots is because other people aren't getting these
No
shots.
question.
Of course.
No question.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Bob, you're going to start us off with the news items telling us about China's plans to build a ginormous spaceship.
Yeah, they recently announced a plan to build or research a kilometer or kilometers long spaceship to be built in low Earth orbit, and I found that just so amazing. To me, that's like something you only see in science fiction movies or novels. I mean, that is gargantuan, a kilometer or two.
Is it too early to raise questions?
No, go right ahead.
You mentioned going into orbit. Does that not make it a space station as opposed to a ship?
Well, they're building it in orbit.
Yeah, the plan would be to build an orbit. But yeah,
doesn't a ship imply traveling?
yes. I mean, I thought the same thing. My first thought was a ship traveling in space, but no, the plan is we think that that would be like something like a space station, but it's not 100% clear. But the thing though is that this whole thing is about constructing it, researching it, and how would you construct something of that size? No matter what you do with it, that's the main focus. And this, of course, is coming from the China version of NASA, which is the China National Space Agency, CNSA. And so I was looking at China recently in terms of their space agency. You got to give these guys credit. They've had an amazing 20 years. I mean, look what they've accomplished. They have astronauts in space. They're building their own space station this year.
Rover on the moon.
Tiangong. They're building it right now, and they've got a plan to get this thing. It's only going to be about the fifth of the size of the International Space Station, but I mean that's big leagues right there. And they're developing heavy lift rockets. That's something that not many nations have the wherewithal to do. They're sending robotic explorers everywhere. You remember Chang'e 4 land? It was a lander and rover on the far side of the moon.
Yep.
We've never landed on the far side of the moon. They also had, get this one. This one surprised me. I wasn't aware of this. They had a Mars mission that was the first. It was the first mission that had an orbiter, a lander, and a rover all in one mission.
Cool.
That's something else that has never been done before. So these guys are definitely in the big leagues, and they're doing an amazing job. So it begs the question, what's going to happen in the future? What's going on with China and their future with their space agency? So one of the things that was in the news recently was this 5-year plan. They're considering proposals that came from the National Natural Science Foundation of China, which is managed by the Ministry of Science and Ministry of Science and Technology. Sorry about that. So one proposal of the 10 proposals they got and funded for like 15 million yen was creating an ultra-large spacecraft spanning kilometers in low Earth orbit. Kilometers. This says kilometers, but most other people are saying that it's basically a kilometer is what they're investigating. Now, the foundation's website. If you go to the website, and if you can read the language, great. I couldn't, but this is apparently what it says. Major strategic aerospace equipment for the future use of space resources, exploration of the mysteries of the universe, and staying in long term. So that's how it's described on their website. So two of the big things they talk about in their plan is that they need to minimize the weight. They want to research how do you minimize the weight for something of this scale, and the fact that this would be constructed on the ground and then assembled in space. So so you would you'd make these big chunks like the International Space Station, build it on the ground, and then bring them up to space and kind of put them all together. Now, so just imagining a kilometer-long structure of any kind is pretty daunting. So the former NASA Chief Mason Peck said that I think it's entirely feasible. I would describe the problem here not as insurmountable impediments, but rather problems of scale. Well, yes, the scale, yes, that would be, the scale is what is really this whole story, is the scale of it. So now I thought it would be helpful to compare this to the ISS. So to put the International Space Station into orbit, it took 42 assembly flights. It took, guess how many EVAs it took to do everything?
Hundreds probably.
232 EVAs. It cost $150 billion to develop and build.
Whoa.
And $4 billion a year just to operate this, and to make, do the maintenance and whatever. Well, what maintenance they're doing, I'm not sure how good the maintenance is. It's really showing its age at this point.
And it took the efforts of 2 major nations plus several.
Right, exactly. This is clearly, yes. Initially, it was more of a United States thing, but then they brought in, Russia and lots of other countries. So lots of countries have been contributing. So the International Space Station is 109 meters. China's proposal is 10 times that, 10 times that length, and who knows how massive it's going to be? It could be 20 times the size when you get down to it.
What's the point though? Why does it need to be that big?
Well,
Right?
that's
Did they get into that?
yeah.
Or is this really? Is this like?
Jane, you sound like me.
But it's look as cool as it sounds. I mean, this sounds kind of like Jeff Bezos. Like
Who's got a bigger ship?
like
The one
why make it so long?
The one reason to make it that big is if you're going to use rotation or something for artificial gravity. So I couldn't find like an artist impression or anything what the design of the ship is. Maybe they're not at that point yet, but are they planning it to be that big because they want artificial gravity? Was there any mention of that, Bob?
no mention at all, and I don't think that's where they're going. I don't think we're quite ready for that. I mean, I don't think we're quite ready for this either. But it is a little mysterious. We're not exactly sure what they want to do with it. The descriptions are a little vague. But Michael Lembeck, professor of aerospace engineering, he said this was obviously a fun quote. It's kind of like talking about building the Starship Enterprise. It's fantastical, not feasible, and fun to think about, but not very realistic for our level of technology, given the cost. So based on a lot of this and what I've been reading, this doesn't seem to be practical at all. And I think what they're doing, they're only devoting a little bit. It's not a lot of money. Clearly, they're not thinking about creating this soon. I think they're going to study this. They're just going to study it. What is it going to take? What is it going to take to get this into to build a structure that big in space? And I think the conclusion that they're going to come to is that this is going to be way too expensive. to do, at least in this way. I think when the time comes in the farther future when we can build something of this scale, that they're going to probably do things like, how about 3D printing in space? So what you would do is you'd have these compact masses on the ground that you would launch into space. Still, it would be very expensive, generally speaking. But then you could take those compact masses and then create these huge, elaborate, kilometer-long structures using some type of 3D printing, which would be a lot easier than building it and then launching the big chunks from the Earth.
It seems like it would be easier, but I mean, when you look at any one of those modules that they've put on the space station, they're complicated. The wiring and everything, like a lot of that stuff, I don't know if they could pull it off in space.
Well, the problem, Jay, is the vagueness, because we're not sure. A lot of this depends on what exactly are they building. Are they just building like long struts and things, or are they going to have lots of modules with people inside them? It's a completely different story. If it's going to be people, living in all sections of it, then this is going to be far heavier, far more expensive, far more complex. If there's a lot of these structures that are just there for support and you don't need to have people living in them, then it's going to be a lot lighter, it's going to be a lot cheaper, it's going to be a lot easier.
Sure.
So some of these questions can't be answered until we actually know exactly, what they're going to do with it, exactly what the design is with more detail, and that will come. But I do like the idea that they're studying what kind of technologies are needed to create something of this size. Because who doesn't want a kilometer-long construct in
But isn't that
low
going
Earth
to be
orbit?
a target for space debris? I mean, have they
That's-
calculated that into their?
That's another problem that they'd have to factor in. But when you have something of this size, you have to factor in things that you've never had to factor in before. Because if this thing is a kilometer long and you have ships docking with it, or if you're going to be making any maneuvers in orbit, then you're going to have to. There's going to be if you bump this thing with something of the mass of a space shuttle. This is going to create these, it's going to create motion and little, and like waves that go back and forth in the structure itself. And so they're going to need dampeners to absorb the energy from the impacts. And if it's in very low Earth orbit, there's going to be drag, so the orbit's going to decay. So you're going to have lots of fuel with rockets so that you can get it into a higher orbit. The ISS does that all the time.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic.
So lots of complications, and we
really
just don't
does.
have enough information to really see, exactly what this.
How
details.
visible would a ship that size be from
If did light? Oh, you.
The ISS is visible.
Yeah, you
is
see the
visible. This would be.
I mean,
I
like
was gonna ask.
naked eye, or just the
Oh,
telescope?
absolutely
or-
naked eye.
Really?
The ISS is
Crazy.
naked eye right
Yeah,
now. This would be
George, it would be
10
huge.
times more
Yeah.
naked
It
eye.
would look like, if it's going
What's
to
the
be
comparison in size to the ISS?
Times
Well,
10?
it's going to be 10 times
It's
longer
10
than
times?
Yeah.
It would be, a kilometer would be, say, 10 times, about a little bit less than 10 times the width. Just the width, not the mass.
What about the
necessarily.
girth? Sorry.
And how big was
Don't even-
Mir?
don't.
Does anybody know off the top of their heads? Was
Not
Mir
a-
smaller than the ISS?
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
ISS is the biggest
smaller.
artificial construct
Okay.
that ever created in orbit like that. Mir was far smaller. Actually, I do know. This would, I think we're talking, Mir was a fifth of the mass, I believe, or the fifth of the length of the ISS, about approximately.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
and
so
then
it's a
this
lot
is
far
a
smaller.
10th?
And this is
This is
would be
10 times the ISS.
10,
Wow.
Yes, 10 times. 10 times the width. A kilometer, anyways, about 10 times.
But what's the
the
bottom line, though? Is it just like we really don't have the technology to build something that big, or is it just that it would be a massive project that would cost trillions of dollars?
Right. It's technically feasible. It's not like we have to develop whole new sciences to make this happen. We could do it, but we'd have to be willing to spend hundreds of billions, maybe
Big
$1
sinkhole.
trillion. Maybe not that expensive, but the time and money.
Yeah, they always run.
I mean, Steve, I compared, like the ISS, I said there was 42 assembly flights. This would require what, 80,
1,000.
90, 100? I don't know. How many
400?
EVAs?
Yeah.
Too expensive, and we're not ready. We're not ready. We're not there yet.
Maybe next century, that kind of.
From what I'm hearing, though, it just sounds more like a thought experiment more
Yeah.
than a real proposal because, again, they're not even saying why it needs to be that big. Like, it just seems
Yeah.
kind of like a fantasy.
It's a little bit. It's more than a thought experiment. They're going to actually try to see what the technology would be needed. How to do this. With modern technology, how do we construct something that big? And that's kind of what they're looking at.
Okay, let's move on. So Jay, tell us about the effects of social media on children?
No effect.
As a parent, I've been following news items that come up about this. You know, a lot of people, like friends and family, we talk about it because social media, has a bad rap. It's measurably done some bad things, depending on, I guess, your perspective. But, specifically, what's the deal with social media and kids? So in March of 2021, Facebook announced that they're working on launching a version of Instagram for children 12 years old and younger. So I'm just curious, guys, what's your knee jerk on hearing that?
No.
Bad.
Bad.
What's
Why?
what's
I think-
Instagram? Kidding.
I think
12
that
and
the thing
under?
is 12-year-olds are already on Instagram. So
Yeah.
if there's an area where there are greater parental controls and there's more restriction, the kids are going to use it anyway. Why not make a space for them?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know. I think it's not a bad idea.
That's the logical argument from the outside looking in. You could make it make sense by saying, you have to be 13 years old to use Instagram. The younger kids, if their parents are not paying attention or if they're letting them do it, they're faking it, they're on there anyway, and they're exposed.
There's no way to prove that you're 13 years old. You just self-attest.
Yeah, that's right. So Facebook,
Even that's dangerous.
We could do what China does, right? China requires you to scan your face
Yeah.
to essentially log in to video games, social media. They're using that technology in order to monitor kids because they have their new rule: 3 hours a week video games.
yeah.
I'm going to buy a deep.
Wow.
You
So
get a deep
Facebook is aware that
fake.
kids do this, that they fake their ages, and they decided to make a targeted platform for the younger age group. And Facebook and Instagram are saying all the right things too. They want to encourage kids to use an age-appropriate platform that their parents can manage. It sounds very benevolent.
That they could monitor for pedophiles.
Yeah, I mean, look, if they had their heads in the right place, but there's a lot of details here we have to unpack. So the truth is, a lot
Yeah,
of
the
people.
question is, this is marketing, no? Like, it all comes down to marketing. That's how they make their money on these platforms.
Exactly.
So we're going to be selling crap to our 11-year-old kids?
So there's a lot of people that are fighting against this idea, and in particular, there's an activist group named Fair Play, whose goal is to create a safe space for kids to live without marketing and influence a big industry, like you were saying, Kara. So they sent Mark Zuckerberg a letter. They wrote a letter, and they said, hey, Mark, we want you to kill this project. It's not good. So in their letter, they cite several studies, and these are, I've read a lot of these studies that back up their sentiment. So, they're saying that media has a negative effect on children, and it's not just social media, but in general, it's screen use, right? It's not just social media, but just screen use in general has some negative effects. So here are the common risk factors that were found in most of the studies. Obesity, lower psychological well-being, decreased happiness, decreased quality of sleep, increased risk of depression, and increases in suicide-related outcomes such as suicide ideation, plans, and attempts. Now I have 2 young children. I read that and that's horrifying to me. My kids love their screens, and they have not
Yes,
been
they
exposed
do.
to social media yet. And I'm acutely aware of my wife and I pay very close attention to this, and we want to know more about it. So, that's one of the reasons why I decided to talk about this. So another study found that children are, in quotes, uniquely vulnerable to advertising. And listen to this. Let me give you the reasons why. So young kids can't detect that they're being manipulated. They don't know. They don't know when they hear and read and see things that there's a layer of manipulation involved in the whole thing. So around 12 years old, kids could start to become aware that advertising is really about companies making money. But even when kids are aware that advertising is essentially manipulation, kids are horrible at resisting the marketing. And I have to admit, I am too in certain circumstances, I fall over for marketing that work, as an example, I really like Adidas shoes. I admit to the world I like them. So they have these really great hiking shoes, and I've bought a pair, and I bought several pairs. I love them. And Adidas had this thing where you could get a $50 coupon for $40. And I sat and looked at my screen for 5 minutes, couple of days ago talking myself out of doing it because I don't need any more shoes, but I'm an adult.
He really doesn't.
I don't. But I mean, I'm an adult, and I'm very aware of like social media's effect on people and what it can do and how it gets into your head. And I was still.
And you also, and Jay, you can tell the difference between reality and fantasy. A very young child who sees an ad for a pair of shoes and the kid in the advertisement starts to fly is going to have a hard time understanding that these shoes, for example, can't make you fly.
Right.
And so that kind of marketing can have a really dramatic effect on them because they have a hard time understanding the difference between this is marketing versus this product would really do this. And oh my gosh, Mom, I need this. It's going to change my life.
Of course, exactly.
You can't fly with those
and
shoes?
I have lots of stories from my life I remember like this one story was crazy. This kid, it was someone that I worked, the company that was like next door to my company, and I was friends with some of the people in the other company, and she was like telling me like, her 8-year-old son wanted to play Grand Theft Auto. And I'm telling her, don't get it for him.
Yeah.
Just don't get, that's not for an 8-year-old kid. And she caved and she got it for him. And not saying that this is not legit research, but the kid ended up having like massive problems as an adult. And I couldn't help myself, but I'm just thinking like, how many times did she buy that video game for him? How many mistakes did she make exposing him to things that he shouldn't have been? And what were the real effects of it? Well, we're starting to find out. Now, I know that video games don't cause violence. I know that those studies are legitimate. But it's more of, I think, this idea of screen use and social media and marketing. It's more of the marketing aspect of it. And it's also the peer pressure that happens. I have a whole section here that I'll come back to that talks about the reasons why and what's actually happening and why it's bad for children to do this. But I want to get through the meat of my item here because there's a couple of other things I really have to say. So beyond the marketing angle, social media exposes children to online bullying and to sexual exploitation, right? The sexual exploitation as a parent to me blows my mind. The bullying, I'm already seeing my children being bullied in school. I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. They're already being bullied. On the bus, at sports, everything. It's everywhere. Bullying is rampant in their world. I'm constantly talking to them about it, explaining to them, trying to make them understand why the kids are behaving the way they are. But those two things, bullying and sexual exploitation, are not the worst thing that can happen to kids online. Here it is. During preteen and teen years, kids develop their identities during that age range, right? So, young children up into your teen years, you're figuring out who you are and what kind of
really into your 20s.
Right,
Yeah.
You're right. It is, but
it continues.
But you're very vulnerable and susceptible, much more when you're younger. So this is the way that kids perceive themselves. This is how they find and fit into their social structures. So while their identities are being molded, kids are like I said, they're super vulnerable and they're constantly interacting with their peers online, and they upload images of themselves. They're constantly looking for acceptance and praise, and kids get these things from the way the platforms tell them that they're acceptable. It's not like they're talking and they're playing sports and their friends like, oh, come on, you're not working hard enough, or great job. They're looking for likes, upvotes.
Yeah.
And it's platform things. It's Facebook and Reddit and Instagram. It's the way that the adults who created these platforms decided what's going to be the positive feedback. What's going to be the thing that gives people a dopamine hit.
And those are quantifiable too, which is the thing. A praise from a friend is one type of thing, but a heart or a check, and you see how many you have versus how many your friends have.
Yep.
It is a binary piece of data where you're like, oh, I am less important than my friend because she has 400 likes and I have 300.
Exactly, the friends and followers thing.
It's not good.
Think about being an unpopular kid. Just think about this right now.
Yeah.
Imagine being an unpopular, dorky kid
It confirms.
using social media and desperately trying to get
Likes.
any traction you can. Right? And I'm setting the stage for the next thing I'm about to tell you. But this is what happens. This is how the kids are getting the way that they feel valued from their peers, from the way social media is conjuring up the acceptance. What is acceptance, and how are they getting praise from their peers? So the online feedback first is fast, and it could be super emotionally harmful for kids, and not just from the other kids, but from the platform itself is giving kids feedback. For example, if they don't get responses and likes to their posts, it reinforces negative feelings. So what happens?
Yeah.
All right, so I just want to interject right here and say, to be fair to social media, because I want to give the pluses that it does bring while we discuss this. There are kids out there who are marginalized, and they can and do find like-minded people, right? Now, the closest I can say is that I'm a skeptic, and when the internet was coming online, my skepticism was really starting to grow, and I found a community online, and it was a great feeling to find other skeptics and critical thinkers out there. That was fantastic. But imagine being...
Whatever happened with that, Jay?
Yeah, I don't even know. I
happened?
just
Did you-
lost interest. But imagine being a part of a small group of people. What if you're gay and you want to meet people? It's fantastic. You can meet people that are suffering the same social issues that you are, and there's wonderful things that can come from the internet and from social media. But
that also assumes, Jay, that we're talking about things like chat rooms and groups and places. Some, as I think you're probably alluding to, some of these platforms aren't structured that way.
Yeah.
So of course, if you're on Reddit or if you're in a Facebook group, you're able to find your friends, you're able to come together as a community, and it's mostly about communication.
Yeah.
Instagram is mostly about display. And unfortunately, there's good evidence to show that the types of posts that get the most likes, yes, Instagram is also a place for activism and it's a place to be heard, but it's very well accepted that a picture of your face is always going to perform significantly better than words.
Yep.
And so unfortunately what happens, and I don't want to fully gender this because I think this does apply to young boys as well, but in a heavy way applying to both cis and trans girls, what ends up happening is that there's a representation of themselves that's not true to life. There's so many filters available on
Yes.
platforms
Yep,
like this
yep,
that
you're
allow
right.
you to completely transform the way you look. So when we think about all of the psychological damage that came from magazine covers when we were kids,
That's
little
right.
girls seeing pictures of supermodels on magazines
Barbie
and
dolls,
saying,
all that.
Yep.
I'm never going to look like her. I don't. Now she can actually transform herself to look like those things.
and this
think
is
about
only the
deep
beginning.
psychological
Yeah.
conflict, that comes from that.
So these platforms are designed to keep people on the platform and to continue to engage, because that engagement is generating money, right, through ad sales for these platforms. So the more people that use the platform, the more money they make. And the kind of behavior that gets the most responses, Kara, I thought of you when I read this. The kind of behavior that gets the most responses on social media leans far on the side of negativity and being mean, especially in kids, right? So people react to these kinds of posts more than they do a happy post. Of
course, just like on Yelp, right? People don't
Exactly.
leave review. I mean, they do. They say, I had a great experience, but much more often they say, that was the worst meal of my life, or I hated my manicure, and this is why.
Exactly.
It's,
So in the kids' world, like we're talking about bad restaurants and bad politics and stuff in the adult world. In the kids' world, they're exposing themselves to this platform. They're putting pictures of themselves up there, and they're every single post is important to them in a really significant way, right? So they unconsciously learn that they get more attention when they do bizarre things and mean things or whatever. It's just the fact of life. This is what's happening online, and they lean into it.
And Jay, I saw firsthand when I was working in the foster care system, and of course these are vulnerable youth, and I was working with adolescent girls, so between the ages of, let's say, 11, maybe 12 was our youngest, up to 18, that very often they would sneak, social media, and they would have multiple Instagram accounts with like different fake names or different, this
Oh
one
my
is
God,
for my
it's-
friends, this one is for the boys, this one. And very often they would be chatting with many, many members, either of the same or opposite sex, whatever they were attracted to, they would be chatting with many members. But I especially would see this ideation that, oh, well, this is my boyfriend, this is my boyfriend. I have all these boyfriends online, many of whom you don't know if this is a real human being. You don't know if this is another young child who's playing along. You don't know if this is an adult. And the rhetoric between them was very scary. I mean, this was borderline like concern around sex trafficking. And I saw this quite often within my foster youth, who were probably more vulnerable than children obviously being raised in a family setting. But you don't know. You don't know the kinds of conversations and how much deception is actually taking place within those, and how much of this is healthy adolescent play versus manipulation by adults.
Sure. Right. I mean, there's lots of danger vectors for children because of how vulnerable they are and how, they're not nuanced. They don't perceive things well enough to really navigate that. It becomes very complicated. But this idea that kids lean in to like the crazy posts and the mean behavior and everything to get that attention that they want, So here's a question. This is something for you to think about as I wrap this up. How responsible should social media platforms be for this? Right now, I don't think that they wake up in the morning and think, we're going to hurt kids today. I can't believe that. I think what they're doing is they're like, we're going to wake up and we're going to make money today. They lean into making money, and unfortunately, the way that these platforms make money, as there was a great documentary. What was that one? It was about social media. I can't remember the name right now. That amazing documentary about
The Netflix one.
Yeah,
the one on Netflix. Yeah,
it was the social dilemma.
Social.
The social dilemma like freaked me out. It was so hard to watch because I realized just how manipulated we all have become on social media, and we're kind of like, whatever. We don't even care at this point. It's so weird. But I do think that social media platforms they should be made responsible because it is happening on their platform. Just because they're making money doesn't mean it's okay. Doesn't mean that what they're doing is okay.
We as a society, we used to set standards. As a society, we voted so that at the governmental level, there was a requirement back when we didn't have social media, and we were talking about media only through television and radio, that our advertising dollars on things like, nightly dramas would go to pay for our news. And would go to pay for our children's programming. And those things were not linked. Children's programming and news were not money makers. They were money users. And it was required by law. That was a regulation that we completely disbanded during the Reagan era. There's no reason that we couldn't, as a society, band together and push for new regulations that say kids and basic news should not be directly tied to advertising. It's a massive conflict of interest.
Europe
There's
has
no
all
reason
kinds of.
we can't say that out loud.
Europe has all kinds of rules about what you can advertise to kids and what you can't.
Absolutely.
Like in certain times of the day or whatever, radio and television and internet, you can't have targeted advertising for children. And that's probably 30% of American advertising, 40% of American advertising is directly towards children. So you can totally regulate this, but to get that to happen is a very challenging thing.
So I'm out of time. I wanted to read more. I have information that was from the Fair Play website. Look them up. Their website isn't just Fair Play; it's Fair Play for Kids or something like that. But you'll find them if you just type in Fair Play into Google. They have a page where they go into the details about what very specifically. Like I'll give you one example. Like being watched and watching. So the always-on reality of social media means that children become hyper-aware of themselves and others in a time when their identity is really developing. And this hyper-awareness actually is very bad for them because they're constantly thinking about themselves and how they relate to other people. And they're spending way too much time in that mindset, and it's bad. And they give you a really nice list of information that you can think about and maybe, start paying more attention to your kids' use of social media, talk to them about it, make them aware of advertising, just tell them what advertising is. Just giving them a heads up on that could help them not fall for it so deeply, even though, kids are super vulnerable to it.
All right. Yeah. So, Evan, the last item before we click over to DragonCon. We obviously are engaged with science communication. Our goal is to make people appreciate science, trust science, but this is tricky territory. You're going to tell us how easily this can backfire.
It can backfire, and that's definitely the results of a new study that were published in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology, in which they found that people who trust science are more likely to be duped into believing and disseminating pseudoscience. Yeah,
Whoa.
which is in a way, not intuitive, but those are the results. And this isn't just this study. This is a continuation in which we are seeing similar results. This is just the latest, greatest. I don't think I have to define what pseudoscience is for our audience. We should hopefully know what that is. It's something pretending to be science that is not. It has the trappings of science, yet it does not qualify. But that line, exactly where you draw it can be complicated. It can be very, very tricky, not always clearly demarcated. And it's in that blurry area in which the pseudoscientists thrive, frankly, and wholly exist. This study, a series of 4 experiments involving a total of about 2,000 U.S. adults. Researchers randomly assigned study participants to read a news article, actually 2 news articles, and complete an online questionnaire asking, among other things, if they believed the article, believed it was true, and whether it should be shared with others. So these adults were asked to read about 2 different topics. The first topic was a fictional virus created as a bioweapon dubbed the Valsa Virus, V-A-L-Z-A, the Valsa Virus, which was said to be made in a lab and that the U.S. government concealed its role in creating it as a bioweapon. That's the first topic. The other story was actually a real study supporting the idea that mice develop tumors after eating genetically modified organisms.
Not a tumor.
But the study was retracted in 2013, but the participants were not told about the retraction. Okay?
Right.
So you had one wholesale fiction, the other was actual, but retracted because it turned out to not hold
Because
water.
those mice get tumors anyway.
They were rats, but yeah.
That was why they were the rats, yeah.
Yeah.
So researchers assigned some of the people to read versions of the news stories that featured activists, non-scientific people, basically spouting the information, whereas others read versions of the news stories featuring actual scientists. They would gauge the participants' level of trust in science. Researchers asked them to indicate whether they agreed with various statements. For example, one of the statements was, scientists usually act in a truthful manner and rarely forge results. And then another statement they threw out there for people to gauge, the Bible provides a stronger basis for understanding the world than science does. So these were metrics to try to, to get people and how they basically feel about these things. And there was also an experiment among this set of studies in which the participants responded to a writing prompt, which was meant to put them into a particular mindset before reading their articles. So what that means is that one prompt was to put people in the trust the science mindset. And they gave them some examples of how science had saved lives and otherwise benefited humanity. And another prompt aimed at critical evaluation at a critical evaluation mindset, which was directing participants to give examples of people needing to think for themselves, not blindly trust what the media and other sources were telling them. So
they were priming them to either to believe or to be skeptical.
Yeah.
And the results they came up with is that those who expressed or espoused higher levels of trust in science, just trust in science, turned out to be the most likely to believe the reports if they contain scientific references. In other words, if the pseudoscience was there and they simply trust science itself, it didn't matter, they fell for it. Okay? But for those who demonstrated a stronger understanding of the scientific method and scientific methods in general, they were less likely to believe the false stories and what they read.
Right.
Which again is consistent with what we've seen in prior studies.
The people with the lowest level of trust in science did not have any effect from whether or not the news item was connected to science or a scientist.
Right.
So the trust in science was a prerequisite, at least a somewhat, at least a minimal amount of it, to being manipulated by saying, I'm a scientician and I say this is correct. So it could, trust in science was a dose response curve there. So it actually made people vulnerable to being manipulated by tying pseudoscience to either a scientist or referring to an article. Basically supporting the pseudoscience with some reference to science worked well for people who had a trust in science, unless they had a high degree of methodological literacy. So basically they were not only scientifically literate, but they had the critical thinking and methodological background to be able to deconstruct the fake science for themselves.
You need both.
Right.
Well, and this makes perfect sense. It's
Sure.
the reason that Doc so-and-so's snake oil is easy to sell. If he doesn't have the lab coat and the name doctor, people don't want it from him.
Right.
It's
right.
because people have that trust and authority, which is pseudoscientists, charlatans, they know this intuitively.
Oh, yeah.
And they
do.
use this to their advantage.
Absolutely.
They don't go out spouting things that don't sound scientific. They spout things that do sound scientific because they know people will trust them more if they do it that way.
If they have a baseline trust in science.
Right.
So the irony
Absolutely.
is that as science communicators, if we are only fostering a generic trust in science and scientists, that is just setting people up for manipulation. Actually,
Right.
doesn't really work as a strategy. You have to combine it with the critical thinking skills and the ability to at least judge sources, judge the validity of evidence, for yourself to some extent, which gets very tricky.
Oh, yeah.
Our job was too easy anyway, Steve. We need a challenge. We
Yeah,
need
thanks,
a challenge to
But
inform people.
we have to remember that through most of modern Western history, from the time that science came onto the scene, like modern science came onto the scene, only in the beginning and, in the examples where it butts up against religious doctrine, we often see distrust. But beyond that, science was like, we were in awe of science as a culture. We really respected science, and we bowed to the amazing things that science brought us. And it really is in many ways a new phenomenon that there's an educated portion of society who's not necessarily driven by religious dogma that don't trust science as a function of, this like narcissistic, I know better than the experts, this kind of like the trappings, as we know, of sort of the conspiracy sect. That didn't have a large hold in the past. So this really is a new phenomenon that we're having to grapple with, because historically, people trust scientists, and that's why it was easy to become a pseudoscientist.
Right. All right, so it's 7 o'clock, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If all is going well, then we should be streaming to DragonCon, to the Skeptic track. So I don't know if we have no way of knowing, actually. Down there.
Is anyone down there watching?
Yeah.
Can they tell us?
Yeah, so just,
We hear things.
What do you hear?
I'm not hearing anything.
I just heard
hearing
some
the
like.
stream, we're not.
Oh.
We're not.
Well,
hearing
Yeah,
it.
I just heard
if
some
they-
sort of like chatter that sounded like a busy room. Ian,
If
what was
somebody
that?
if somebody at DragonCon can jump on our YouTube stream and just put a chat in there to let us know, that would be great. But Steve, we're moving forward as if they're there.
Yeah, so we're going to have to just assume that we're streaming to DragonCon. So first, let me just say sorry that we couldn't be there in person. We had planned to come. We really wanted to come. But the Delta variant was just spiking too hard. And because of our complicated lives and our professions and family members, etc., it just couldn't justify the risk. Derek had said that people were going to be, it was going to be a hybrid conference where people would be streaming. So we chose to stream our show to DragonCon. Again, hopefully that's working. And at some point, if you're joining us late, you'll pick up what we're talking about. We were just discussing the challenge of science communication, and a recent study would show that trust in science actually makes people more vulnerable to manipulation by pseudoscientists. They're more likely to believe pseudoscience if it is supported, which is a long tradition, by some reference to scientists or a scientific study or something like that. The guy wearing the white coat, or a study showed this. If you have trust in science,
Or just big words.
or just a picture. It just all has to do with be a picture of sciencey stuff happening. Seriously, this has an effect.
There's also, by the way, Steve, there's also good evidence, psychological evidence to show that if you just put a picture of anything next to a headline, people are more likely to believe it if there's a visual component.
Right. So, but this is something that we know as scientific skeptics, not just science communicators, because we've long been saying, and the research really strongly supports this, is that, yes, you need to teach scientific literacy, right? That's one of the planks of scientific skepticism. It's just, you need to give correct misinformation. You need to give people a basic fundamental knowledge about science and how science works. But in addition to that, you need to give them critical thinking skills, which includes understanding pseudoscience and how pseudoscience works and how to distinguish pseudoscience from genuine science, science denial and how that works, and how to distinguish science denial from genuine skepticism, because the science deniers all portray themselves as skeptics. We're asking the hard questions that no one else will ask. But no, if it's a perverted version of that designed to deny legitimate science, then it's not skepticism, it's science denial.
Steve, could you repeat all that so George and I can write it down?
Yeah, and then the third thing is media savvy. You need to understand, like we were also just talking about social media and the internet, you need to understand how information flows through our modern society, how you could find reliable bits of information and distinguish that from unreliable sources, because we all know people, personally, colleagues, obviously as skeptics, we all know people who are essentially living in an alternate reality because they live in an alternate ecosystem of information. And they think that they're completely right and we are all hopelessly duped because we believe in things like anthropogenic global warming, that vaccines are safe and effective, that GMOs are safe, that evolution happened.
How silly are we?
Yeah, I know. That the Earth is basically a sphere. These things make us gullible in their eyes. And seriously, there are people who, if you are immersed in this alternate reality of information and alternate sources and alternate, journals and outlets and everything,
It's the Truman Show.
Yeah, exactly. Social media makes it very easy to do all these things. You don't need a big brick and mortar institution that's been around for 100 years. You have a slick website.
Steve, and correct me if you disagree, but the fix is that critical thinking needs to become part of the classroom.
Yeah.
Or part of the canon. It has to, there should be multiple times during a child's career as a student, they should be taking classes on critical thinking and be taught these things.
Oh, I agree. It has to be woven in throughout the science curriculum.
And how
more than just the
media
science.
savvy.
I think it should be in every class.
Yeah.
Every
Oh,
class
yeah.
should have a
Woven in,
component.
yeah.
Or,
Wouldn't it be
Logic,
fantastic,
right?
Kara, if
Critical
teachers,
thinking.
if teachers were taught critical thinking and then that bled into the classroom that way as well.
Right,
But we don't. I mean, it's rare. We get emails from people who say, "Oh, I was inspired by this one teacher that I had at one point," or this isn't a common thing at all. It's
and it should be. It's
incredibly
like
uncommon.
at my university, which granted, we're talking, it's a PhD granting university. So already we're at a level of sophistication that we're not talking about elementary school. But for example, the ethos of my university is that social justice and diversity is necessary to becoming a good psychologist. You have to be aware of these things. So every course has a diversity component, right? Like whether you're taking history and systems of psychology or whether you're taking a course on group therapy, you have to weave a diversity component into the curriculum. And I don't see why we can't do that with critical thinking in every class.
Of course we
Right,
can.
whether it's
Of course we
woodshop
can.
or literature or mathematics.
I mean,
Of
Kara,
course, critical thinking makes sense in all of them.
If there is one thing that the skeptical movement does, it would be to fund a lobbyist to go in and help bring change to governments, to get this information
Isn't
into
it
the
sad that
classroom.
that's how we have to play?
That
Because
is
our
how it
system
has.
with the
That is
lobbying
how it
system?
works.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Yeah.
But in addition-
Hey,
in
we're
addition to
lucky that there is a way to do it, right? At least.
Well, used to be you would just, you wouldn't actually pay your conference.
I know,
people.
but I
You
mean,
write
I'm just saying the holy grail here really is to get the government around the world, have governments around the world change the priorities.
Wouldn't it make
Well,
sense?
and let's
though,
be clear, some places do this, and some school districts do this, and some incredible institutions do this already. It's not widespread, and it's not well adopted. But I mean, we shouldn't talk about it as if nobody had this idea before, because I think that this is, among very good educators who really focus on pedagogy, I think that this is a well-established truth.
Of course, yeah, we didn't come up with this. It just happens to be the truth, and we're I'm telling everyone, if you don't know this, that's the answer. And that's what we should be focusing on. And it's mind-boggling how impossible it is to get the money it takes to do this, because There's no money in critical thinking, in science, and skepticism.
And so how do you do it? How do you fight against the fact that there is money in teaching anti-evolution rhetoric and anti-critical race theory rhetoric and rhetoric? There are these states that publish our textbooks, Texas, where, there are concerted efforts, and many southern states where there are concerted efforts to take actual data, truth, reality, history, science out of the textbooks and out of the
critical
curriculum.
thinking, and specifically critical
And
thinking.
critical
Squash
thinking.
it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
They want
This is the thing that blows my mind. That the closer you get to critical thinking and skepticism, and the list that Steve said, right? You take all of that and you think about people who are aware of this and everything. Like, it's almost as if, like, as you go down that pathway, there's less and less funding and less like grassroots interest. It just isn't happening. There isn't enough of us out here to change the world. We just can't do it. Like, as much as I want to, and as much as Bill Nye has been saying it for years, like, we want to make people enthusiastic about science again. We want them to respect expertise, become experts themselves. Where are the $1 billion donations to change the education systems around the world? Where is all that money going? Why are people funding pseudoscience and not funding critical thinking? These are answers that we can't come up with in the next hour while we're doing this. But there is a truth behind it. There's a reason why money isn't being spent in those areas. And how do we overcome that?
Laissez-faire capitalism.
Yeah, but it's
Like, we have a structure in place that doesn't incentivize things like morality and knowledge. It's just not the way that our system is built. Our system is built that if you are somewhat greedy, if you have a way to make money, you're going to come out on top. I mean, that's the incentivism, or the incentive here is to make money and to get your agenda across.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it is. And granted, our agenda is one of knowledge and education and, but that's unfortunately not lucrative.
Yeah, right.
Our system doesn't allow for it.
Someone in the chat said, pseudoscience is a moneymaker, essentially. It's sexy. There's something exciting about it. And
pseudoscience has a better ROI.
Yeah, exactly. That's what he said.
It's easier,
But
quicker, more seductive.
Only in the short term, right,
Short-term,
Evan?
Yeah.
Because we're talking about the fact that our system is also structured to, fail the marshmallow test at every level here in America.
Yeah.
And across a lot of kind of Western societies. It's not structured for long-term investment.
No, it's not.
All right, George has been trying to.
I just wonder, this idea of a sea change in the educational system of incorporating critical thinking and skepticism across the border into the whole curriculum. I think it's a fantasy, because it's for something like that to occur is such a gigantic proposition. I wonder if a focus of our effort as sort of the fringe collective that we are, that could have some influence. I don't know how true this is for everybody here, but there was a time in school where all the girls went into the auditorium one day and they got the sex movie. And all the boys went into the auditorium that one day and they got the sex movie. And it wasn't the best, it wasn't the most clear, it wasn't the most, the best sex ed necessarily presentation, but it sort of gave you the basics and it set up something to understand. This is how procreation works, and this is the boy parts, this is the girl parts, great. Could there be some kind of equivalent of a one-time, like an unbelievably well-produced, 45-minute thing of this is like how advertising works, this is how critical thinking works, and to get that in front of people's faces, in front of students' faces, if nothing else, is that a better target to shoot for of hey, let's have, schools have assemblies.
Yeah.
Schools have assemblies, and to say, let's get a critical thinking assembly into the rotation that's going to be happening versus, wouldn't it be great to have critical thinking at every juncture of a student's education? Of course it would. Is that realistic, though?
Well, yeah, but unfortunately, what we're talking about isn't a single fix.
I know it's not a single fix, but I'm saying better than what's happening now.
Yeah. So I mean, I think
but just like that video, it doesn't necessarily. We'd have to look at the actual outcomes. Did did that prevent any unwanted pregnancies? Maybe not. You know,
Yeah,
we'd have to really
I don't know. Maybe this is the best
understand, Are
example.
we hitting them at the right time?
I just know that
Are we
I
hitting
saw
them?
Cosmos as a kid, and it was like 30 minutes, and I was in. I was in. There was 30 minutes. Now,
Life-changing.
again, my
It was.
environment was set up so much that my parents had inspired critical thinking and a love of science, etc. But that was a catalyst. And I'm thinking there can be catalyst moments for young people that sometimes can be just in a well-done presentation of, like, it happens with music, it happens with drama, it happens in all kinds of different things, that a single presentation, a single moment, a single person seeing a play. I know how many stories you hear where the kid goes and sees a play for the first time and they go, I want to be an actor. This is amazing.
I call it the Big Bang moment.
Yeah, the Big Bang
It's
moment.
when
Let's
it
work on
clicks.
But we
having
have
Big
to
Bang
have
moments.
enough of those. We
Yeah,
have to have
that's-
enough Big Bang moments that
Sure.
they'll hit the kids at the right time.
But George, I think the problem is
Yeah.
that we were all, everybody here, and probably the vast majority of the audience that we have, we inherently love science, right? Like, we grew up and something happened and we fell for it, you know? That's the problem. That in and of itself is the actual problem. Is like most people don't fall in love with it as quickly as we do. We're the low hanging fruit of science enthusiasts.
I don't know, man. I think if you hit a kid right with some really, I mean, look how popular, you know, the slow motion guys are on YouTube. Look how popular a lot of science communicators are because they're doing presentations that are incidentally science related. You know, look. I mean, again, MythBusters is the top example of, like, the top syndicated cable show, you know, one of the top of all time, was created by a bunch of critical thinkers who weren't making a critical thinking show, but used critical thinking to blow stuff up, and it was amazingly produced and amazingly done, and it was the idea of, let's make this entertaining and interesting. And there's going to be a whole generation of scientists because of MythBusters, no question.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right,
they themselves, they see that when they do their live shows, or Adam talks about this all the time, that young people come up and they're like, I'm in, I'm so in. I'm saying, is there some equivalent of that could be done in a partial curriculum basis, as opposed to trying to say, boy, wouldn't it be great to just have an entirely different curriculum?
So, all right,
I think so, but should we call the sex ed vid the Big Bang moment? Should we do that? I don't know. Think about it.
So, I mean, obviously you're correct, George, and I think partly we're doing that, right?
Yeah.
I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
You know, we're producing as much content as we have. We're trying to flood the culture with as much, you know, pro-critical thinking, scientific skepticism kind of content as we can. You know, we do try to bring as much as we can of that into the classroom. I know a lot of what we produce gets used by science teachers in the classroom. We get a lot of feedback from science teachers who use the SGU, use our book, use, you know, a lot of the content that we create. A lot of the, Ian, is everything all right over there? All right. You will give talks to schools, right? We'll go into schools and give talks. I know Richard Saunders has a whole magic show that he does teaching critical thinking, going into. So we should do as much of that as possible. Maybe, you know, if what you're saying is maybe we should divert a little bit more of our focus towards producing the kind of content that could be incorporated into the classroom. But still, I actually don't think it's a pipe dream to change the education infrastructure in a positive way. For example, there is just a culture in science that it's dirty to deal with and talk about pseudoscience. And they don't like to do it. They don't understand it. And therefore it doesn't trickle down in science education.
Right.
And that is the thing I really would like to change. And I think we collectively, the scientific skeptical movement, should try to change. It's like, no, teaching about pseudoscience is a critical element of teaching science. The evidence overwhelmingly shows that.
Yeah.
This is one more study that we're talking about today. One more on a mountain of studies which show that the knowledge deficit model is limited. It's not worthless, but it's limited. You can't just give facts. You can't just teach science. You have to put it in the context of, this is how we know what we know, and this is what happens when it goes wrong.
Show how terrible it
You
goes.
know
Yeah,
that
you
you're
can't-
doing it right because you're not doing it wrong. And
Yeah,
right?
you can't teach clinical physiology. You can't teach a physician how to be a good doctor if you only ever show him non-pathological.
Yes.
You know, it's like you've got to see what happens when it's happening the normal or typical way versus when something goes wrong.
But,
and kids are never going to understand critical
Yeah.
thinking if you only teach them the sort of cheery, saccharine version of how things should be, or
Yeah,
you
you'll
know,
make
this
them
is
vulnerable.
Right.
You'll make them.
Totally.
You have to teach pathological science in order
Yeah.
to contrast that to healthy science. And if you don't do that, all you're doing is making a bunch of pseudoscientists.
Steve, this is what I'm confused about, because I think teaching kids about pseudoscience is almost like showing them a magic trick, right?
Yes.
If you tell them, like, here, let me show you like what's wrong about this. Let's discuss it. We'll break it down, and it becomes interesting because you're almost empowering them with the knowledge. And my kids love it; they're responding to
That can be
this.
so entertaining.
Yeah,
man. That
I
can
think
be
it could
so
be done.
entertaining.
Now, and another,
But
and
also,
another.
we're-
Go ahead, Kara.
We're making a core assumption that, like, Melissa in the chat made a really, I think, intuitive or insightful comment, which was that it's not uncommon to teach critical thinking in schools, by the way. Like, if you were to get a group of educators in a room and say, we should teach critical thinking, nobody would be like, I don't think so. Like, educators, by and large, agree with this. There are obviously external forces trying to change our curriculum structure, but people who do this for a living are like, hell yeah, we need to be teaching critical thinking, and many of them do. The question is, or the concern is, it can be undone at home.
Yeah.
It
Oh,
can
yeah.
absolutely be undone in the home.
Without a doubt.
We only have control over, you know, our academic system.
That's
we
right.
cannot control the fact that parents
can't
have a
control it.
much greater influence over their children's outcomes. And
Yeah,
their
so
So we got to
children's
educate the
structure.
parents as well.
We can only do what we can do, right? We can control the
Chicken and
things
egg
that we control.
situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. So, Kara, you're going to tell us about research using human embryos.
Yeah, so there was a feature article that was put out in Nature by a science writer named Kendall Powell called What's Next for Lab-Grown Human Embryos. And the subtitle, which I think is very telling, is researchers are now permitted to grow human embryos in the lab for longer than 14 days. Here's what they could learn. So what I'm not sure if all of us are aware, but there has long been in place an international consensus decision that there is a 14-day rule. That's what it's called, the 14-day rule. And this was set by the International Society for Stem Cell Research. It's been, you know, discussed ever since the 70s when IVF really did become an actuality for many families. Prior to that, you know, you kind of didn't have a lot of options. But when IVF really became an actuality, there became more embryos available, and individual, you know, countries, different research groups that we want access to these embryos. And of course, there was a big international discussion that was really codified in the mid 2000s, just like we're seeing now with CRISPR, right? Like, you have a new technology available. Where do the ethics fall in? Where do we want to draw a line in the sand? And for a long time, that line in the sand was at 14 days. So before we talk about what happens next, let's talk about what that meant for researchers. Well, first and foremost, most labs can't even grow embryos to 14 days. It's really freaking hard to do. There's only a few labs in the world that have managed to do this and to do this consistently. Part of that is because many countries have their own legal regulations that go beyond the 14-day rule. Like, it's actually illegal in many countries to work with human embryos at all. But in the countries where it is legal, the US being one of them, the 14-day rule says that you cannot continue to grow human embryos beyond 14 days. So what happens in those first 14 days? A lot, but also not a lot. So the embryos do start to organize, and you start to get right at the edge of what's called the primitive streak. So this is a visual thing that you can see under the microscope, a little streak that ultimately is going to form the neural tube. The streak early on, you can tell by the way that the cells are organized, is giving the body design axis. So up, down, left, right, head, tail, left,
Kara,
right.
is that the spine? Are you saying is that
It will become the spine.
Not yet. It will eventually, like during many more cell divisions, become the spine. I'm talking right now in the first 14 days, a ball of cells, a blastocyst that has like almost no differentiation at all. These cells are totipotent. They're not even pluripotent. So these are cells that could literally become anything. And they are really in the earliest stages of starting to develop and differentiate. And so really, really early on, it just looks like a ball of cells. sudden, kind of around the end of that 14-day mark, you start to see the primitive streak. And it's called that because that's all it really is. It's super early, and it's sort of giving you some directionality to the embryo. Then it's going to start folding in on itself. You're going to have 3 differentiated layers of cells that ultimately give rise to things like skin and neural tissue, to body organs, to bone and connective tissue. But at this point, none of that differentiation has occurred. And that's when, up until recently, researchers have had to go ahead and just freeze the embryos and put them in a suspended state, either that or destroy the embryos. And so the research really couldn't continue beyond that. So we're missing a lot of information. That information about what happens when the embryo, or I should say at this point, the blastocyst really does start to undergo gastrulation, to really develop into a primitive organism. And like you said, Jay, develop that spinal column, which starts as a neural tube based on how it folds and then continues to differentiate. All of that, kind of the post 14-day through the next couple of weeks, we can't see an ultrasound. So the only way we've ever been able to study the development of an actual human embryo is through animal models, through embryonic models, and through taking all of this information and gleaning what we think we understand. So we know now a really good amount of what happens from day 1 to day 14. Of course, we can study an embryo at different stages that was spontaneously aborted, for example. We might be able to look at it, but we can't physically grow these things beyond day 14 and understand exactly what's happening, both at the structural level, but perhaps even more importantly, at the molecular level. Because it's been this international consensus that says you can't do that. Well, back in May, that consensus changed. The governing body, again, they are called the International Society for Stem Cell Research, the ISSCR, released new guidelines. It relaxed the 14-day rule, and it allows for study of gastrulation beyond that. They didn't put a new line in the sand, which a lot of people are concerned about. They didn't say it's no longer 14 days, it's whatever. They basically said so few labs do this. If you want to continue beyond 14 days, you just have to seek approval.
So few labs are capable of going beyond 14
Wow.
Just individualize it rather than making a
Well, I guess that's positive. That's a great move.
And so, of course, there are people who push back and say, I wish they would have set a new line in the sand. But then, of course, the pushback against that is it's very arbitrary what this line is. And a lot of it really does feel moral or religious. Oh, maybe now we're starting to see heart structure, or now the neurons are starting to fire. What does that mean? Could it have thought? Could it have feelings? Could it have, these are where a lot of these complicated questions come up. But they're the same questions we grapple with when we talk about brain organoids. We just discussed brain organoids in a previous podcast. And to be clear, there are like these pseudo embryos. They're not actually called pseudo embryos. I just made that term up. But there are these embryonic models that have been developed. Really, really complicated, incredible science. And when it first was developed by, I think, a Japanese researcher I'm not going to be able to bring it off the top of my head, and I don't want to spend time searching for it, but a Japanese researcher at a university here in the US first developed how to make these embryonic models. It was like a watershed moment, and then people were able to learn the protocol and other labs were able to do it. But there's no real determination or guarantee that what's happening in an embryonic model perfectly matches with what's actually happening in development.
And what's the model like? I don't understand. It's an organic thing?
Yeah. So they actually can take certain types of pluripotent cells and induce them to grow in a certain way, but it's not a human embryo.
Right.
It's cell types that have been stuck together and induced to grow, kind of like the brain organoids versus an actual brain being grown.
So they're trying to ultimately make a distinction between a clump of cells and a person. They're trying to draw lines. Beyond this point, it's actually now a person, and we're ethically going to treat it that way, as opposed to it's a clump of cells that we're studying scientifically. But of course, it's a continuum, so there is no sharp demarcation line.
There's never going to be a sharp demarcation.
Yeah, there's never going to be.
So historically, it was 14 days.
Yeah.
this international group has lifted that. Now, one thing that's interesting is that, which I didn't really realize, although maybe I did, is that here in the US, we don't really have a lot of regulation about working with these things. The regulation that we all thought we had probably comes into play because we have a law that says that these types of investigations can't be federally funded.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So most labs can't do this because they can't access NIH or NSF dollars to do it. And it's expensive, right? And they have to have their own setup to be able to access and acquire these things. And so very few labs have really worked out the logistics, but the ones that have argue that there's so much more we could know because there's this gap in our knowledge between what we can see on ultrasound and what we can test in a developing fetus, through like chorionic villi sampling or any other way to understand developmental biology. And what happens after this 14-day rule. There's kind of a black box area that we've been able to model, we've been able to look at animal research, but really within humans, it's interesting how much of a gap we have in our knowledge. And there are a lot of things that this could shed light on. It could shed light on, for example, the reason that a vast number of embryos don't last. The reason that many, in early stages of pregnancies are lost. And we still don't really fully understand what's happening biologically. What we do know is that when IVF candidates sample fertilized eggs, very often we get reads about the genetic health of these fertilized eggs because some of them will be tested. Some of the researchers that were interviewed for this article stated that they feel that those negative results on these tests could actually be somewhat overblown because very often you'll look at the DNA and say, is this DNA healthy or is it not? But weirdly, sometimes when we sample individual cells, unhealthy DNA doesn't necessarily mean apoptosis. It can. So apoptosis is pre-programmed cell death as opposed to necrosis, which is like death through other means, right? Like disease or lack of nutrition or whatever. So sometimes our DNA says, go ahead and die because you're no longer useful or you're in the way. And we often think that if you're looking at a genetically damaged or genetically mutated cell within an embryo, that those cells are going to be bad and they're probably just going to self-destruct. But in this type of research with human embryos in vitro, what these researchers have realized is that this is a cool thing. What do they call it? Autosomy cells? Basically cells that should only be like haploid, autoploid, whatever. Cells that should only be haploid, for example, or diploid, cells that have one or two copies of a chromosome, but accidentally have three, like in trisomy 21, trisomy 13. Early on, cells that we think of that shouldn't be able to keep developing often can self-correct and become things like supportive tissue. Because only some of those cells actually become the embryo. Some of them become the amniotic sac. They become all sorts of supportive tissues. And weirdly, they can actually adjust and become supportive tissue, and the embryo itself can remain healthy. So there's a lot of course correction that can have very early on that we hadn't known until we started studying this stuff in vitro. So it's really cool, the different things that that we may be able to understand about genetic disease, about human biology, about development, about spontaneous abortion, aka miscarriage, that we probably wouldn't have been able to know if we couldn't study these things. And that's why these researchers are really saying it's a good thing that the 14-day rule has been lifted.
Yeah, it's good that we're getting rid of a semi-arbitrary rule and just saying, all right, we'll just make individual decisions, justify your research ethically. It's just
so
a legitimate ethical concern,
Yeah.
And
You don't want
everybody,
people growing
research
human beings in a lab, to study them.
completely. But all researchers have to already go through an institutional review board. And this is an actual international review board. So it's another layer of regulation. They're already approving this stuff. Why not do it on a case-by-case basis if so few labs can do it anyway?
Yeah. Okay, we're going to do a couple of quickie news items. Then we're going to do a special segment with Evan, and then we'll do science or fiction. That's the rest of the show. So this is a robotic prosthetic arm. This is a type of research I've been talking about for years. talking about a lot of incremental advances.
It's like
that
your
we're
head's
making.
being squeezed, Steve.
Yeah. Oh, this way. So the researchers are calling this a bionic arm.
Bionic.
Bionic arm.
Sure, why not?
We can
Why
rebuild
not?
Conjures images.
So this is a function of what we call a brain-machine interface, where you're basically, anytime you're having biology interface with a robotic or a mechanical device or a computerized device. In this case, it's not connecting directly to the brain. They're using a very cool method where, so this is these are meant for people who have an amputation, and they have surviving nerve endings. You can graft let's say, for example, you graft the motor nerve, the stub of the motor nerve basically, onto a clump of muscle tissue.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that does is it keeps everything alive, but it also means, so now that nerve is going to connect to this little patch of muscle. And you might be thinking, well, what will that do? It's just a little patch of muscle. It can't move your limb or anything. However, what that does is it amplifies the signal from the nerves. Because nerves
Cool.
produce a very, very low amplitude electrical signal. Muscles are like 10 times as much, like a much bigger electrical signal from a muscle cell depolarizing. And so essentially that little clump of muscles, not only the nerves and the muscles keep each other healthy, it amplifies the signal. And then the signal from that little patch of muscles contracting activates the bionic arm. So that's how you get motor control, through your pre-existing motor nerves. So you're controlling it through the normal motor pathways that you had previously, but now you're again using the clump of cells to actuate the bionic arm. However, what the breakthrough here, no component of this is new. What's new is bringing this all together in this one limb. What the other two components are sensory. So one is having skin sensors that connect to the sensory nerves, which are grafted onto parts of skin. So again, they're taking the existing nerves, grafting them to some intact tissue, and then using that as the interface to the mechanical connection. So in the motor nerve, it goes from the motor nerve to the muscles to the actuators in the arm, and then in the sensory feedback, it goes from the sensors in the surface of the robot, the skin of the robotic arm, to this predetermined patch of skin cells that the sensory nerves were grafted onto. So with this arm attached, biologically to the subject, they did this in 2 subjects only. So this is like sort of early research. They were able to control the limb, through voluntary, control, through the nerves, and they were able to feel the sensation, like the tactile sensation of the arm. But then there was a third component, which is very important, and that is they used haptic feedback, like vibration, in order to simulate the movement of the muscles themselves. So that the person wearing the limb can feel the movement of the muscles, right? They're getting sensory feedback that represents not only like is the hand open or closed, but how much pressure is it applying.
Wow.
Cool.
And that's very critical to closing this loop. Now, without this sensory feedback, somebody who had a similar arm, but without the sensory feedback, has decent control, but they have to constantly be looking at the limb. They have to look at it in order to control it, and they're very clumsy in their error correction because they don't know how hard they're contracting it or opening it by feel, so they have to judge by what's happening, and it
A little lower, Steve. A little lower.
it slows everything down.
So, Steve, with this biofeedback, can I call it biofeedback?
It's not it's haptic feedback.
With this haptic feedback, after time, will they eventually be able to actually feel? Will their brain interpret that as a feeling in the limb?
Yes. So the brain happily incorporates all of this into its circuitry, so that people feel like they own the limb, not that they have a limb attached to them. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there isn't this arm attached to me. It's like, this is my arm now.
Agency.
Yeah, and, well, it's ownership is the term.
Ownership.
And they can control it without looking at it. And their ability to error correct and make adjustments is at like near normal levels. Like that's what they were studying, is like their ability to control the limb was actually more similar to an intact person than it was to somebody using an older prosthetic without the sensory feedback.
It becomes part of your internal representation of your body. What is that called? Come on.
Cryoperception.
Your homunculus?
Yes, homunculus. It becomes part of your
Yeah.
homunculus, basically.
Yeah.
When you just think about it, that like you can close your eyes and you can tell when your hand is open or closed.
That's proprioception.
That's proprioception. Okay, like
Yeah.
that's amazing. I'm sorry. That's still. I know this is stoner talk, but it's just you know that
George.
it's amazing.
Yeah, luckily.
Read stories about people who lose it. It's
Yeah, right. I know, yeah.
incredible
Yes.
when
Yes.
people lose proprioception.
So again,
Whoa,
all
I
of
haven't-
these pieces have been
I wanna read
are
that.
pre-existing. This is the first lab to bring them
it.
all together
Cool.
into one limb and show that it improves the usability of these limbs. So we are
Getting so
getting there.
close.
We're
Was
getting
it a
so
$6
much
million study, or was it?
Yeah. I mean, we're still 100 years away from the $6 million man, but which is interesting. Like in the 1970s, we thought, yeah, we're probably pretty close to
Yeah.
getting
Yeah,
up
sure.
to this, but it's like 150 years away. But this is where we are. This is still
Well-
a fantastic improvement. Trust me. To the point where that we as
120.
depicted in the $6 million man,
Oh,
we're
yeah.
indistinguishable from a living, limb to the user and to
Yeah.
other people. Forget about it. We're nowhere near that.
Now, Steve, if you
Too
had
bad.
one of these arms, can you pick up the front end of a car?
No.
Yeah.
It's
Strength
still-
limitations.
Yes, you have
You're
to.
still
You have to
limited.
just hitchhike. Yes.
So it's not, it's strapped on still. It's touching the skin on the
Yes,
outside.
but
of
there
the body.
is this biological interface.
Right, but it's
You're not
it's
going to be
touching-
entering the shot put
Is
competition.
it sticking? Is it like an electrode in the muscle, or
No,
is it,
no, because it's the electrodes are either stimulating the skin or reading the muscle contraction from
Okay.
from the.
So it's not like a-
Yeah, so if it fell off, if it was ripped off, like you wouldn't be injured. For
Yeah, there's no wires
Yeah.
going into the arm.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the reason why I say that though is because structurally, the body and the musculature are not really like these arms couldn't pick up a lot of weight.
No.
All kidding aside, yeah, they couldn't.
No, but it'd be functional. You could pick up a can of soda. That's
Yeah.
you could use it
Yeah.
I mean, you could pick it up and
And you
not
may be
and
able
not
to
be
pick up
looking
your
at
child.
it.
And not be
with
looking
the
at
proper
it.
strength.
and
Right.
know that
And know
you're-
that it's there.
know how
and
hard
know you're
you're
not
squeezing
crushing
it.
it.
Yeah,
Right.
Amazing.
exactly.
That's amazing.
So
Getting
I
there.
keep a close eye on this technology, and it's
Bionic
again nice incremental improvements.
Yeah.
This was worthy of comment. All right, Bob, you're going to give us a
Oh.
quickie about caves on Mars.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yes, thank you, Steve. This is your Quickie with Bob, everyone. Recent analysis by scientists have shown what could be more than 1,000 caves in the Tharsis Bulge region of Mars. I don't know
Tharsis
where that
Bulge?
region is, but it sounds kind of cool.
Make a left at the Clausen cutoff. Tharsis bulge.
Calculations show that these caves could be life-saving for future human colonists, not unlike the lava tubes on the moon.
I knew that was gonna
Now,
happen.
this presupposes, though, that Mars is far deadlier than a lot of people, I
yes.
think, really, truly understand. They think, oh, it's got an atmosphere, that's not bad. But
really.
it doesn't. It barely has an atmosphere, barely,
Yeah.
and it does not have a magnetosphere, which
Very
is
small one.
also very critical. I mean, regarding the atmosphere, if you're at sea level, well, on Mars, it has 0.7% the air pressure that we experience at sea level. I mean, that's like,
It
it might
does.
as well be nothing.
Yeah.
It's so small.
Bob, let me ask you this.
Yes, ask.
You may remember this answer because it's in our upcoming book,
4.
Guide to the Future. What pressure would you need to have on Mars or anywhere? What pressure would a human being need in order to be able to survive without a pressure suit?
Oh, it was.
A lot.
No, it was actually
One
less
atmosphere.
it was less
Yeah,
than we
right,
thought,
1
wasn't
It's
it?
6%.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
That's it.
Yeah.
Of an atmosphere.
That's survivable. You can
You
survive
could
with that?
survive. I mean, you can't breathe. You need oxygen, but It's not that as much as I thought. It's
Right.
really
But you
But
won't
you
like
can't-
implode.
you won't. Yeah, you won't.
Right, but and you can't move. And you can't move because if you move, then you'd run out. But yeah, but still, even if that is true, but even so, we would need 6, 7, 8 times what's there now just to be able to breathe in enough oxygen.
But we
It's
could.
so
With the volatiles on Mars, we could get to the point where there was enough of an atmosphere where all you would need was supplemental oxygen. A face mask.
Right,
You wouldn't need
right.
a pressure suit.
yeah.
You wouldn't be like Arnold
cool.
Schwarzenegger in
Right,
Total Recall.
but talking reality today,
Yeah.
it's a horrible place.
Yeah.
But it's not just the atmosphere though. It's the extreme ultraviolet and ionizing radiation. It's so deadly. How much deadlier do you think it's on Mars in terms of that radiation than on the Earth?
10
You're wrong,
times. You mean
Jay.
because-
900 times. The radiation doses are 900 times.
I don't think I've ever
Little
been
more
wrong
greater.
so fast in my life.
You were wrong before
So-
you asked the question.
So calculations show. Come on, this is a quickie. This can't. It's got to be under a
I'm
minute,
waiting
right?
for you to finish.
Okay.
Again.
Calculations show that only 2% of the UV would get through most of those caves. Only 2%, but enough light would get in that photosynthesis wouldn't be completely gone. You'd still be able to take advantage of photosynthesis. And they think that for the ionizing radiation, it would be the same. Very little would get in. So this could be a real haven for future colonists. Also, while you're in a cave, you could also search for life, Jay.
Yeah.
Because if I'm living on Mars, I'm going in a cave, even if I'm a little microbe. So there could be, who knows, what kind of life could have developed on Mars, eons ago in these caves. So, in the future, Arnold Schwarzenegger may say,
Get your ass to a cave on Mars.
yes, this was your quickie with Bob. I hope it was good for you too.
Okay.
Thank you, Jay.
So Evan worked up a little puzzle for us that we're going to do before we go to science or fiction.
Yes.
And he has given us a bunch of quotes, and we have to figure out who said
I
them.
like
Or who it's attributed to, right? So you're going to play at home. You're going to keep your own score. We're going to ask each of the individuals here who they think the correct answer is. The first quote: "Science, my lad, is made up of mistakes, but they are mistakes which is useful to make because they lead little by little to the truth." Was that written by Jules Verne, Ray Bradbury, or Edgar Rice Burroughs? Let's go down the list. Steve.
Bradbury.
George.
Bradbury.
Kara.
Burn?
Bob.
Doesn't sound like Bradbury to me. I'll go with Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Okay, and Jay?
Jules Verne.
If you answer Jules Verne, you are correct.
Nicely
Nice.
done,
Journey to
Jaybird.
the center of the earth.
Kara, you and me,
Kara,
baby.
too, nice.
Next, I despise the lottery. There's less chance of you becoming a millionaire than there is of getting hit on the head by a passing asteroid. We'll start at the end. Jay.
That's Phil Plate.
Bob.
Gotta be played.
Kara.
I'll go with Phil. Yeah.
George.
I think it's not clever enough for Phil. I'm gonna say Vera.
Steve.
So she's not clever?
I'll say Brian
just
May.
Phil is known
I'll say
for his
Brian May.
weird, Helikalaka thing.
Steve is correct. It is Brian May.
Brian,
Yep. Good old Brian May. Guitarist for Queen and an
Between Vera
astrophysicist.
Rubin and Phil Plait, yeah. In
Next.
terms of wittiness.
Who said this? "I was captured for life by chemistry and by crystals." Was it Dorothy Hodgkin? Was it Marie Curie or Rosalind Franklin? Steve.
Franklin.
Who's next? George.
I'm gonna say Franklin as well.
Kara.
X-ray crystallographer Rosalind Franklin.
And Bob.
Rosalind.
Jay.
Marie Curie.
Dorothy Hodgkin.
Oh my goodness.
Everyone, right?
Good distractor.
Nice.
Billy Crystal kidnapped her? That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
God.
All right, let's try this one. This is a fun one. "Your immune cells are like a circulating nervous system. Your nervous system, in fact, is a circulating nervous system. It thinks. It is conscious." Was that said by Deepak Chopra, Andrew Weil, or Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama? Jay.
Oh my God. I mean,
It could be any-
It's got to be Deepak.
Okay, Bob.
Tenzin.
Kara.
Yeah, I mean, it feels Chopra-esque, but it's almost not esoteric enough. So I'll say it was the Dalai Lama.
George.
I'm gonna say Chopra.
Okay, Steve.
Yeah, I think it's too coherent for Chopra. I'll say Wheel.
According to the internet, it is Chopra.
Your immune cells are like a circulating
I win again. I
system.
win again.
And if that's the most cogent or the most clear that Chopra's ever been, that's not good. Last one,
So that was
folks.
Chopra, not the random Chopra simulator.
Correct.
right?
Not the
Okay.
Chopra
Consciousness.
engine that generates random
Consciousness.
insanity. Final question, folks, a fun one here. To the movies we go. It could mean that point in time inherently contains some sort of cosmic significance, almost as if it were the temporal junction point for the entire space-time continuum. On the other hand, it could just be an amazing coincidence. Steve. Should I read who they are? Jeffrey Goldblum as Dr. David Levins from Independence Day, Brad Pitt as Jeffrey Goins from 12 Monkeys, or Christopher Lloyd as Dr. Emmett Brown, Back to the Future. Steve.
I mean, it sounds like Emmett Brown, but I don't remember it. I'll say Emmett Brown.
Okay, George.
Marty, it's Emmett Brown. It's me. 100%.
I think it's Doc Brown too, but I'm going to go out on a limb. I don't think it's from Independence Day because there was no time continuum there, but maybe it was from 12 Monkeys. Maybe that was Brad Pitt.
So your answer is?
Yeah, I'm going to go with B.
Okay, you're going with Brad Pitt. Okay, Bob
Brad Pitt.
and Jay.
Christopher Lloyd.
It is Christopher Lloyd, Dr. Emmett Brown.
Yeah, it sounded like Doc Brown for sure.
Have you seen the Rick and Morty with Christopher
Yes.
Lloyd as
Yes.
the live?
Oh, that's
How
great.
is it?
That's
no, it's
awesome.
5 seconds long. It's just a little teaser.
Christopher Lloyd.
It's amazing.
I love
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So that's the mystery quote segment. I hope you
Nicely
enjoyed it. I hope
done.
you all scored well at home.
That was fun, Emmett. Thank
Cool.
you.
Thanks, Evan.
You're
All
welcome.
right, we have just enough time for a quick science or fiction. We're going to have to move quickly here.
Okay, fiction. Oh,
You're on the wrong side.
I
Here we
was
go.
close,
All right, here we
wrong.
go. This is a theme. The theme is fruit. Theme is fruit. It's all unusual fruit.
Help, I need fruit.
All right, here we go. The
Your
jabuticaba
theme
berries,
is
native to Brazil, are the size of plums but taste like grapes and grow directly on the trunk of the jabuticaba tree.
Made that up.
The pawpaw is a sought-after tropical fruit relative native to the eastern United States with flowers that smell like rotting flesh and fruit that contains a high concentration of neurotoxin. Number 3, the yuzu is an Asian tree fruit that is the largest culinary fruit in the world with long tubular fruit weighing over 80 pounds. Now I had to throw in culinary there because pumpkins are technically fruit and pumpkins are the largest true fruit in the world, but we think of it more as it's a culinary vegetable. This is something that, is a culinary fruit.
I thought it was a culinary food.
Culinary whatever. All right, so Bob, go first.
Hold on, I'm gonna put
hurry
the
up, 'cause
link
we don't
in
have
chat.
Yeah, Ian will put a link in the chat to a survey where while we're giving our answers, the rogues giving their answers, you can vote for the one that you think is. We'll check in with you when the rogues are done, and then we'll do the reveal. Go ahead, Bob.
All right, I'll say the yuzu is fiction.
That's it.
Yeah, I gotta be quick, right?
Right. Okay, yeah, we've got 10 minutes. Not that quick.
Oh,
All right.
all right, so let's see.
That's
Number
fine.
one.
No, you're good. But
break
Jay,
this
go ahead,
down.
Bob. It's Jay.
All right, the jabuticaba.
Jay, for the
Jabuticaba.
next 5 minutes, I just want you to say that word.
Jabba no
That,
Boggin.
I believe that one is science. Plums, the size of plums taste like grapes. Yep, that one is science to me. The pawpaw, I mean, I've heard about some type of thing that smelled like rotting flesh, some type of plant. I don't know if it's this one. But, that is a little bit of memory there. So I think that one is real. The yuzu is an Asian tree fruit that is the largest. It's basically an 80-pound piece of tubular fruit. I don't believe that's real. I think I would have heard of it. That one is fiction.
Okay, George.
I think the jabuticaba is the fiction. Even though you said it with such authority, Steve, it felt like you practiced it a little bit too much to really make it sound like it's a real thing. So I'm guessing, because it was too well done, I'm going to say that number one is the fiction.
All right. Interesting logic. Kara?
I have to say the yuzu is the fiction because I've eaten yuzu before, and it looks like a lemon, kind of. Like, I don't know what this crazy 80-pound yuzu is, so I gotta go with you. I mean, don't you guys, I don't get it. Is this an LA thing? You guys have never had yuzu?
No, I've never even heard of it.
Nah,
It's
sounds
on-
like
Who are you?
sounds like a website.
It's on, like, No, it's on like every Asian dessert menu.
Should have had her
Yuzu.com.
last, Steve.
They don't
All right.
even, Kara, I haven't been out of the house in 2 years. I don't even know what's happening right now.
You gotta eat more Asian food.
I know.
And Evan,
I'll go with Kara and Bob. Yuzu. Fiction.
Maybe there's a different variant that I don't know about. But
Even without Kara's help, I think I would have chosen that as the fiction. So I'll say
okay,
that.
Ian, do we have a consensus from the listeners?
Relatively. Here it comes.
seems like it's all over the place.
Oh wow, yeah.
Pawpaw.
Oh, you can make pies out of this fruit. Look at that.
And then using the Jabuticaba berries. All right, so the winner from the as the fiction
Pawpaw?
is the Pawpaw.
It's
among the
Pawpaw.
listeners. So let's take these in order.
Why would that be sought after? I guess for
Jabuticaba
medicine?
berries, native to Brazil, are the size of plums but taste like grapes and grow directly on the trunk of the Jabuticaba tree.
That's weird, actually, now that I think
Evan,
about it.
George, and 27% of the listeners, 25%, think this one is the fiction. I'll answer it with a picture.
Oh, jeez.
Yep.
Look at that. Is that
Where is it?
amazing?
Where is
Now,
it?
George,
On the
There
trunk.
Wow.
Steve's
Right.
backyard.
if you were a frequent Reddit user, you would have gotten this correct.
Is that where I saw it, Jay?
Yes,
That's
it is.
cool.
See,
Yeah,
now I
they're
know my
growing
life
right
I've been
on the
wasted.
trunk and the major branches. It's some of the
Weird.
pictures are just amazing.
It's so weird.
And they're
Wow.
basically grapes
And they
the
taste like
size
grapes?
of plums. Yeah.
Can you eat them?
On
Yes,
the trunk.
yes, they're
on the
supposed to be
trunk.
delicious.
Are there other fruits that grow on trunks of trees?
I've never
know.
seen a tree before that I want to lick.
Right? You can just
Interesting.
go up to the trunk and pick them up. Pick
I
up all
know.
the.
Just
Yeah, they
chew
don't
on it. I would
cluster.
go
They
up
don't have
and lean
stems
on
or
the
anything.
tree
It's
and
just-
start chewing.
I'd never heard of that before. All right, oops. Going the
Tastes
wrong
like
way.
garbage, though.
All right, here we go. The pawpaw is a sought-after tropical fruit native to the eastern United States with flowers that smell like rotting flesh and fruit that contains a high concentration of neurotoxin. None of the rogues thought that was the fiction, but the majority of the listeners think this one is a fiction.
interesting.
And
That
this
might be.
one
That might be fiction.
is science.
Yes.
There is a pawpaw.
Wow.
Ew.
It's apparently it's delicious.
Ooh,
It looks
I
like a
actually
mitochondria.
have a pawpaw
Yeah,
tree
right?
growing in my backyard,
you
like it.
do.
so you can see
Oh.
it if you want to. But it's never fruited. It's just not old enough yet to fruit.
No.
And I bought
But
it.
it is on Instagram.
I bought it because
Oddly
it's
enough.
like a native Connecticut fruit-bearing
Yes.
tree.
But it has a neurotoxin that can kill you.
Yeah,
And
why would you
I-
eat something that has a neurotoxin in it?
Yeah, so after I purchased it, then I started to research it. I'm like, oh, the flowers are pollinated by flies, and so they replicate this odor of rotting flesh in order to attract
the
flies.
flies.
And in fact, if you have a lot of the trees, apparently then they attract flies well. If you have only one or two, they actually suggest that you can hang rotting meat on the tree in order to help attract flies.
Oh my God.
Although many references say, nah, you're probably not going
Don't
to want
need
to
it.
do that. So you could just hand pollinate it. If you have one tree, just hand
Yikes.
pollinate
Steve, does it have to be human flesh?
You don't have to hang roadkill on your pawpaw tree. And yes,
that's a
it
deal
has what one reference calls a high concentration of a neurotoxin that affects neurons in your brain.
I hate when that
And the
happens.
concern is that if you have frequently consume the pawpaw fruit over years,
Yeah.
that it may
Oh, it
actually
builds up.
cause brain damage. It may actually cause toxicity to
stay
your
away from
neurons.
that.
There is no
That
fruit
fruit.
good enough that would want,
But this is
Pineapple.
considered like a delicacy. It is a commercial fruit. It is highly sought after by foodies, by people who are aware of it.
Like blowfish.
Yeah, and it is a tropical relative. It's like a tropical fruit. It's like a guava, or something like that. And I haven't tasted one yet. I kind of got reluctant when I read about the neurotoxin.
Yeah, huh?
Yeah.
But
Steve, somebody in the chat said they taste like a custardy banana.
a custardy banana.
that
yeah,
sounds pretty good.
That sounds pretty good. So all of this means
That
please
Bob
go
was
there,
right.
that
And
the-
apologies,
the
guys, on this
yuzu-
one. I thought I was last.
It's all right,
Yeah,
Kara.
That's
Okay.
okay, Kara. No
Okay.
problem.
That's all right,
I
Kara,
would have
yeah.
said that
Yeah.
if I.
Kara,
if
I screwed up
Violated
recently
the
too. Don't worry
rule,
about
that's
it. We all
okay.
make mistakes.
Yeah.
The yuzu is an
I
Asian
totally
tree
thought it was
fruit
last.
that is the largest
Kara.
culinary fruit in the world with long tubular fruit weighing over 80 pounds. I actually meant for you to go last. I just forgot because I was
Oh, okay.
worried that this was a California thing because I've never
Yeah.
heard of or seen
Never
this fruit.
even heard of it before.
Yeah,
I
but
think it's just that in LA we have so many restaurants.
It's
and
a
we eat so much
Japanese
food from
lemon.
around
Well, the
world.
Asian influence on the
it
West
is,
Coast.
it is a
no
citrus,
restaurants on the East
citrus
Coast,
fruit.
yeah.
It is Japanese. It's
It's
basically
citrus.
yeah. So There it is on the left
What?
picture. That's the an actual yuzu. Now on the right is what? Who recognizes that picture? On the right
I don't know what
is
that
the
is.
There's a truck.
actual,
That's the
that?
the actual largest fruit in the world.
yeah. I have cans of this
Durian.
stuff.
Bigger than a watermelon.
Durian, is that what it is?
Durian?
Jackfruit.
Jackfruit. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
What
it's
is
like,
that?
it's like shredded
we ate
chicken.
jackfruit.
It's
Yeah.
Is
like
that
shredded
culinary,
chicken if you
Steve?
cook
What's
it right.
happening?
Jackfruit, it grows on
Jackfruit.
trees. That thing's hanging from a tree. It's huge.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, it's like a
watermelon
vegan
size.
substitution.
Yeah,
They
you
weigh
can
80
make
pounds.
yeah, you
They
can make
get
chili
up
with
to
it and
80
stuff.
pounds. That's the actual largest fruit.
Wow. If you've never seen it
Culinary
before, you don't know jackfruit.
Yeah, I think Trader Joe's sells jackfruit sloppy joes.
I literally
Like
have
wraps.
cans of Trader
Yeah.
Joe jackfruit in my
Those are
thing.
big
Yeah.
cans, George. Big cans.
Yeah.
The biggest cans in
No,
the
it's
world.
cool.
in
Like they
fact.
totally,
Yeah.
you cook it and it just shreds just like chicken.
Yeah.
And if you spice it right, it's almost you can't tell it's not meat. It's pretty
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. It's,
Weird,
kind of,
and
it's
it's a
used
fruit.
as kind of a meat
amazing. Yeah.
substitute.
So I should have got that right, but I didn't. There you
Yeah,
go.
jackfruit.
Steve, one of
Amazing.
your games gave you a message on the iPad.
I see that. I'm playing Fallout Shelter.
It is a fun game.
It is. All right. Oh, I guess that meant that my settlers have returned to base. I have to go. Anyway,
We'll wait, Steve. Go ahead.
Evan, you have 1 minute to give us a quote.
All right, here's the actual quote to wrap up the show tonight. Trust in science has a critical role to play with respect to increasing public support for science funding, enhancing science education, and separating trustworthy from untrustworthy sources. However, trust in science does not fix all evils, and it can create susceptibility to pseudoscience if trusting means not being critical. Said by Dolores Albarracin, I hope I pronounced that correctly. She is the director for the Science of Science Communication Division at the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg Public Policy Center. I love that there is a Science
Yes.
of Science Communications.
Exactly. See, George, she
Division.
gets it.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Yeah. So is that one of the authors of the study? That you,
Yes, right. This is one of the co-authors of the study that we referred to earlier
Yeah.
when we were talking
Yeah,
about the
yeah,
news
yeah.
item. Yes.
Absolutely.
Let's have her on the show. Come on.
The good thing is there is a science of science communication. We
Yeah.
follow it very closely because it's what we do. And it is. I guess this is self-serving, and I try to be skeptical of this. But the fact is, we've been saying this for 30 years that you can't just teach science. You have to teach about pseudoscience. You have to teach
Yeah.
critical thinking. You have to teach about the mechanisms of self-deception. You got to teach all of that. And over the last 30 years, the research has showed that we were absolutely correct. The scientific skepticism approach to science communication is the far and away the most evidence-based. And it's been very, very satisfying to follow this research over the last 30 years ago. Yeah, this is what we've been saying all along. I mean, obviously it's filling in a lot of the details and, in informing what we do. And there's a lot of nuance here. There's a lot of details that we didn't know, obviously. But just the big picture of you got to teach about pseudoscience is absolutely evidence-based and correct. All right. So, George, thank you for joining us.
Hey, by the way, Steve, is something going on at 9 o'clock?
Yes, absolutely. It's 8 o'clock right now. George, tell us what's happening here in this very studio at 9 o'clock tonight.
Stay tuned on our YouTube channel. You can also watch on the SGU Facebook. You can also watch on the Boomer versus Zoomer because we're doing a brand new game of Boomer versus Zoomer. Another episode live happening 9 o'clock. We're about an hour away. We're going to go live. We have 4 new contestants, a Boomer, a Zoomer, a Gen X, and a Millennial. And they're going to go up against each other. They're going against not just each other, but then they go up against our Quizmasters, which is Jay and Steve, and Brian Wecht is our third special Quizmaster. It's a fun time. Tune in at 9 o'clock. Play along. Root for your generation. Let's see who can answer those questions the best. 9 o'clock, Boomer versus Zoomer.
Thank you, George. George is our wonderful host for that. Thank you, Ian, for running the tech. Buy the book, as it says on the screen there. Buy the Skeptics Guide to the Universe book. Give it as a gift to somebody. Thank you, Kara, for joining us from California.
Thank you, Kara.
Thank you, Derek, for inviting us to DragonCon. Again, sorry we couldn't be there live. We hope that you guys enjoyed our stream. Enjoy the rest of DragonCon. Stay skeptical. And most importantly, until next week, this is your Skeptics Guide to the Universe. Skeptics Guide to the Universe is produced by SGU Productions. dedicated to promoting science and critical thinking. For more information, visit us at theskepticsguide.org. Send your questions to info@theskepticsguide.org. And if you would like to support the show and all the work that we do, go to patreon.com/skepticsguide and consider becoming a patron and becoming part of the SGU community. Our listeners and supporters are what make SGU possible.